The transport ship drifted silently into orbit around Lyra-9. The planet was a swirl of silver oceans and fractured moonlight. From her small viewport, Olivia pressed her palm to the glass. Her breath fogged it slightly, but she didn't wipe it away. She liked the haze. It made the world beyond look softer, less like the alien posting she had reluctantly accepted. Now it was more like a watercolor painting she could step into. She reminded herself that this was a career move, a prestigious one at that. Lyra-9's moon gardens were the most coveted agricultural research sites in the galaxy. This was a place where plants floated freely in zero-gravity domes, roots spiraling through the air like delicate calligraphy strokes. She was here for the science, nothing else. Her transfer pod descended toward the capital settlement. She couldn't help but admire the lacework of ivory bridges suspended between glass domes, each holding its own micro-ecosystem. Below, the seas glittered in perpetual twilight, the light from Lyra-9's 3 moons draping the waves in molten silver. The docking hatch hissed open. Olivia stepped out into a corridor that smelled faintly of something sweet and mineral-rich, like orchids crossed with warm rain on stone. She immediately felt relaxed. Waiting for her was Kaelen. She recognized him instantly from the briefing packet, the official envoy assigned to oversee her work. He was larger than she had imagined. It was her first time meeting a different species. She reminded herself to act normal. The file had not captured the quiet radiance of his presence. His skin shimmered faintly with living light, a language she didn't yet understand. His eyes were deep opal, shifting with every angle of light, like pools that hid galaxies beneath their surface. She was taking it all in and trying to stay focused at the same time. "Dr. Renard," he said, voice low and resonant, the Lyran accent turning her name into a song. "Welcome to Lyra-9." Olivia kept her tone as humanly neutral as she possibly could. "Thank you, Envoy Therian. I'm here to work." The corners of his mouth curved slightly. Amusement, or maybe curiosity. "Then, we have that in common." They walked side by side through the corridor, glass walls revealing drifting, dreamy gardens beyond. Suspended in zero gravity, vines and blossoms swayed slowly, each plant rooted not in soil, but in clusters of nutrient spheres that glowed faintly. Petals floated free, curling through the air like slow-falling snow. "It is said," Kaelen murmured, "that the moon gardens choose their caretakers. Some will thrive under your hands. Others will not." She glanced at him, unsure if it was a warning or a poetic turn of phrase. "Well, I don't believe plants choose," she said flatly. "They respond to proper care, conditions, and attention." Kaelen's opal eyes flickered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you will learn our moons have their own will." Over the next days, Olivia discovered that Kaelen was not just her liaison. He was also the eldest son of Lyra-9's ruling family, bound by a set of traditions as old as the moons themselves. Her presence was already controversial. Humans rarely worked in the inner gardens, and never without years of diplomacy. In their first joint meeting, she overheard whispers in the Lyran tongue. "Why her? Why an outsider? And why does the envoy spend so much time with her?" Olivia tried to ignore it, burying herself in work, monitoring nutrient dispersal, adjusting light spectrums, cataloging plant responses. But Kaelen was always there, observing, asking questions that felt more like invitations rather than interrogations. One afternoon, she struggled with a delicate moon orchid whose petals refused to open. She'd adjusted everything, light, water, nutrients, and still it curled in on itself. She thought to herself, "Goddamn orchids are complicated, no matter where you go." Kaelen approached. His presence almost imperceptible until the glow along his skin warmed faintly. "May I?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He reached out, and instead of touching the plant, he let his fingertips hover above it. A faint pulse of light rippled down his arm into the air around the blossom. Slowly, impossibly, the petals unfurled, revealing a center that shimmered like captured moonlight. Olivia stared. What did you do?" He looked at her as though the answer was obvious. "I asked it to trust me." Something inside her, something she had kept carefully walled for so long, shifted just slightly. That night, as she lay in her small quarters, she told herself it was just a trick of biochemistry, alien physiology interacting with plant stimuli. And yet, when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the pulse of light traveling from his hand into the orchid, and the way it bloomed for him, and only him. For the first weeks in the garden, days bled into one another in the moon garden, a rhythm of light and shadow, of drifting petals and whispered data reports. Olivia told herself she was there for the work, but Kaelen always seemed to be in her periphery. Sometimes they spoke of plant physiology and lunar nutrient cycles, and then other times, the conversation wandered into strange, tender territory. How Earth rains smelled like petrichor, how Lyra-9's oceans glowed when the moons were full, how loneliness sounded different depending on the world you were on. Kaelen would listen to her, with stillness, with depth, as though he were not just hearing her words, but storing them as treasures. One evening, while adjusting light frequencies for the floating gardens, she glanced up and saw him watching her, not with scrutiny, but with something softer. "What?" she asked, half defensive. He tilted his head. "Your eyes change color when you are curious." She started to blush and then laughed. "You're imagining things." His opal gaze glimmered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm simply learning the spectrum of you." A delegation of Lyran elders toured the gardens, robes whispering as they walked. One, an imposing figure with skin that glowed a sharp, almost disapproving white, paused beside them. This was the first warning that came during a formal inspection. "Envoy Therion," the elder said in Lyran, though Olivia understood enough to catch the tone. "The human is very near." Kaelen's expression didn't change. "Yes, she is my colleague." The elder's gaze swept over Olivia, clinical and cold, and then back at Kaelen. "You are heir to the Moon Court. Your alliances are not yours to make." When the delegation left, Olivia confronted him. "What was that about?" "Tradition," Kaelen said simply, though there was a shadow in his voice. "It binds me to certain expectations." Such as never entwining paths with someone from beyond our moons. One evening, in the orchid chamber, the same stubborn blossom she had failed to coax into bloom now floated freely, surrounded by a halo of tiny nutrient orbs. Kaelen stood close, explaining a delicate pruning method. As he reached past her to adjust a blossom, his hand brushed hers. Not accidental, not forceful, just enough to let her feel the warmth of his skin and the faint vibration of light beneath it. She didn't move. Neither did he. When their eyes met, the air between them felt weightless, charged, as if the moons themselves had tilted. The real turning point came during the Festival of Three Moons. Glass lanterns, each holding a fragment of moonlight, were released into the air to drift through the gardens. It was said that those who released one together would have their wishes bound. Olivia hadn't planned to take part. She lingered at the edge, watching the lanterns float away, when Kaelen appeared beside her holding one. "Will you?" he asked. "What would we wish for?" His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Time," he said. She hesitated, then placed her hands on the lantern beside his. Together, they released it. It drifted upward, slow and luminous, joining the others in their silent migration toward the moons. When she looked back at him, there was no hiding what she saw in his eyes, and she knew there was none in hers either. From then on, it was inevitable. They met in the gardens after official hours, walking among the floating vines while the moons painted their skin in silver. He taught her the Lyran language for plants, a melodic blend of sound and light. She taught him the earth names for flowers and the meanings human cultures gave them. They laughed more, touched more. A kiss happened one night in the orchid chamber, slow and searching, as if they were memorizing the texture of a miracle. And then, the news came like a cold wind. An off-world political alliance was being negotiated. Kaelen was to be formally bound to a high-ranking Lyran diplomat's daughter. It was duty, tradition, and the preservation of the Moon Court's lineage. "I don't want it," Kaelen told her, pacing the orchid chamber. "It doesn't matter," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice even. "It's not my world." "I can't ask you." Kaelen stopped her. "You have not asked. I have chosen." But they both knew choice was a fragile thing under the weight of politics. After that, they met one last time in the moon garden, lantern light flickering around them. No words were enough. They simply held each other, as if to fuse memory into their bones. When she left Lyra-9, she didn't look back at the glass domes. She couldn't. Years apart, Olivia returned to Earth, eventually marrying a fellow botanist, someone safe, steady, acceptable. Kaelen fulfilled his role, the marriage to the diplomat's daughter sealing alliances. And yet, some nights, under moonlight, Olivia swore she could still feel the pulse of light along her skin. And Kaelen, standing in the gardens of Lyra-9, sometimes caught the scent of rain on stone and wondered if it was real or if he had only dreamed her. Life for Olivia had turned into a long ache with ordinary mornings. Years smoothed edges and sharpened others. She learned how to inhabit the space her life offered. A greenhouse in the foothills outside the city. A partner, good, kind, predictable, who loved plants and did not ask her to translate her silences. She smiled in photographs like someone who had trained her face to be brave. She slept, most nights. On others, she woke certain she had seen moonlight flicker along the back of her hand. Kaelen stood where duty placed him. He became husband, diplomat, father. The marriage was not unkind. It was, as so many things that did not break were, serviceable. He learned the metrics of peacekeeping and the choreography of compromise. He learned which gardens could tolerate drought and which would die of it. He never returned to the orchid chamber without touching, in passing, the blossom that had chosen to open for the two of them. It had grown indecently large. No one asked why. After 12 long winters, Olivia received a letter with the shape of fate. Earth and Lyra-9 began to untangle the old trade knots and tie new ones. Olivia was appointed as a delegate. No one knew how could they know what corridor of memory the appointment opened. She accepted anyway, because she had built a life on doing difficult things for good reasons. The docking hatch sighed open. The air smelled the same. Rain filtered through orchids. She crossed the domes with an official escort and a hollow, steady feeling in her ribs. When the procession turned at a curve in the glass, he was suddenly there, as if her mind had willed him into being. 12 years had burnished him the way ocean air burnished metal, softened the shine, deepened the strength. His eyes were galaxies pulled closer, not more distant. When he said her name, the bioluminescence in his throat brightened, like a body remembering how to sing. Olivia. Envoy Therian, she managed to say, and then half a beat later, a betrayal of protocol. Kaelen. For a time, with too many people watching, formality shepherded them away from the only conversation that mattered. It was night before she could walk the gardens alone, and even then she believed in the fiction. Only until he stepped between floating vines into the same circle of light. "Do you still speak to them?" he asked, nodding at 3 orchids drifting like small moons. "Not like you do," she said, and then nothing else, because her chest had filled with something both smaller and bigger than breath. "I kept the bloom we coaxed open," he said, his voice low, as if talk might disrupt the gravity that currently allowed them to stand. "It thrives. It would not let me call it by any name but yours." Humans did not learn to glow, but something in her warmed as if she had. "Thank you," she said, because thank you was the only thing she could say that would not break her in this moment. They met again in daylight, under pretense of reviewing a cross-species pollination protocol. They sat too close, but not close enough. They spoke about neutral topics until neutrality exhausted itself. Finally, Olivia laid the wordless stretch between them on the table like a living thing. "What now?" she asked. Steady, because steadiness had been her salvation. Kaelen looked at her softly. "My marriage ended 3 orbits ago," he said without ornament. "It ended kindly. That is the only kind I would permit." She closed her eyes. Once, against the complicated relief that rippled through her right now, she exhaled her words lightly. "I am no longer married," she said. "We ended kindly, too. Some love is better as blessing than as a life." They breathed, and the vines drifted around them like seconds unwilling to drop. "If we were reasonable," she said, "if we respected what we built out of the pieces left, we would nod and bow to customs," he finished, and return to lives that do not ask courage. I hate when you do that, she said, smiling despite the ache, finishing my sentences. I love when you begin them, he said simply. Leaving would be subtraction. Staying would be sacrifice. There are romantics who insist those words mean the same thing, but Olivia had mapped the distance between them and found it measured in futures. She could leave Earth, the work she had shaped with devotion into something that mattered. The greenhouse with its faithful seasons. He could leave Lyra-9, the court that needed his patience like a tendon needs bone. One of them would have to move planets for the other to grow. I will not ask you to abandon your inheritance, she said. You grew here. You're made of this light. It would be cruel to uproot you. Plants are moved, he said. They learn new light. They do not always fail. The wise ones are not potted on a whim, she countered. They're transplanted with patience when seasons favor it. And only if both gardens agree. He laughed, soft, for joy that the metaphor had chosen them. Then allow me to be wise. Kaelen, she whispered, like she was saying a prayer. I would come to you. He did not force it. He put the words down between them like a tool, humble and sure. Not because my world is lesser, because I have given it enough and it can flourish without my name at its center. I thought duty and love could not be reconciled. I was taught that was the honorable sorrow of leadership. But I have watched you work. You do not choose between care and courage. You refuse the false choice. Teach me that. She had spent so many years being careful. In that moment, carefulness unlatched an inner gate and looked out at a field she'd never crossed. Come, she said, but not as exile. Come as graft. Graft? Two lives spliced so both can thrive, she said, smiling fully now. We don't cut off the rootstock. We bring a branch across and bind it until it learns to drink from shared sap. He made a small sound then, a light-caught breath, and the bioluminescence in his hands flooded like dawn. On her final night before the delegation would return to Earth, the Festival of Three Moons haloed the domes again. Lanterns drifted everywhere, small glass hearts beating light. 12 years earlier, they had wished for time. They had received time, offensive in its abundance, merciful in what it kept intact. Now, standing shoulder to shoulder in a wash of silver, they lifted another orb between their palms. What do we wish for? She asked. Courage, he said. Patience, she said. They smiled at each other like people who had agreed on a world's shape and could not wait to inhabit it, and they opened their hands. The lantern rose, carrying both words, both futures. Around them, vines brushed their shoulders like benediction. Months later, Earth mornings found a new light in the foothills greenhouse. It did not blaze. It glowed. Visitors paused in the doorway without understanding why their throats tightened. Blossoms sometimes hovered where no breeze stirred them. If asked, Olivia said it was a quirk of circulation. If asked twice, she shook her head and sighed a yes that meant, "You saw it. Let it bless you." A tall man with opal eyes spoke to the plants in a language no one else on Earth had learned yet. And if someone listened long enough, they realized the language was only half sound. The other half was attention given, until it became love. On nights when the moon laid a silver stripe across the greenhouse floor, Olivia and Kaelen tended a particular orchid together. It had arrived from Lyra-9 in a stasis cradle with 2 notes. One official and one in the intimate script of a friend. The official message ratified an unheard-of arrangement. An heir released with honor by unanimous consent. His counsel to be sought across distance. His bond recognized across species. The personal note said only, "Bloom well. Send us seeds." The moon court could be arrogant. It could also be wise. The orchid had been small when it left Lyra-9. In Earth's gravity, it learned its own weight and did not mind. It opened for them on a Tuesday, releasing a perfume in the morning with something like rain and memory. "Plants don't choose," Olivia murmured, more habit than belief, and Kaelen smiled at her. "They do," he said, "when the right hands ask." She ran one fingertip along the air above the blossom, never touching, and felt her whole body answering the way the flower did. With loosening, with light. Outside, the city went on with its necessary noises. Inside, 2 people built a quiet world where nothing bright was forced to hurry. Some nights they still lit a lantern, the Earth version, paper, not glass, and watched it lift over the greenhouse roof. It looked fragile in the wind, the way brave things often do. They watched until it was no longer an object, but an idea, and then until it was no longer an idea, but a star. When the lantern finally disappeared, they stood together in the afterglow, hands damp with old wax, and breathed the same air in the same time. They had not defeated the old rules so much as rewritten where the page began. They had chosen to bloom. There are nights when love is a vow. There are nights when it is a ladder. And there are nights, many more than you would think, when love is a greenhouse at the edge of town, where the lights are left on for a while after closing, and 2 figures move slowly among the vines. One carries a watering can, one carries a lantern. They pause often, to listen for the quietest thing in the room, and answer it with their gentlest selves. If you drift to sleep picturing them, let the image soften at the edges, until it feels less like a story you were told, and more like a memory of a place you might, if you needed to, find again. And if you wake in the blue hour and swear your hands remember how to glow, it isn't a mistake. Some languages are learned by being loved in them. Rest now. Somewhere, worlds away and just next door, a moon garden floats, unhurried, waiting for morning.